My name is Emily Johnson. I am 23 years old and I have just lived through what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, my parents turned it into a wound so deep that I will never forget it for as long as I live. I graduated in business administration from the University of Texas at Austin after 4 relentless years of balancing study and work. I attended classes during the day, worked evenings at a small cafe near campus, and took on extra office jobs on weekends to help cover tuition fees while also contributing to my family's living expenses. My parents were never wealthy, and our home in Austin was far from fancy, but I believed that carrying part of the financial burden would ease their load. Deep down, I always hoped that when I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, they would finally look at me with pride and see that every sacrifice and every exhausting shift I worked had been worth it. The ceremony ended, and the Texas sun cast a golden glow over hurried snapshots with friends and professors. I held my diploma tightly against my chest, overwhelmed by a joy mixed with relief. All those years of effort had finally been rewarded. I told myself that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe there wouldn't be a grand celebration, but at the very least, there would be a warm dinner, a few words of congratulations from my parents, perhaps even the embrace I had longed for all these years. That didn't feel like too much to ask for a daughter who had just reached one of the most important milestones of her life, did it? I thought so as I drove home, heart fluttering with excitement and just a trace of nervousness. But the moment I turned onto the familiar street and parked in front of the house, my heart nearly stopped. Scattered across the porch under the harsh glare of the afternoon sun were suitcases, bags, and cardboard boxes. My belongings, clothes I had folded neatly, books I had studied from for years, all dumped carelessly as if they meant nothing. For a split second, I thought it had to be some mistake, or perhaps a cruel joke. But then I saw my mother Mary standing with her arms crossed and an expression like stone. My father John avoided my eyes, and my younger brother Brian smirked under his breath. In that instant, I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was reality. I rushed toward them, my heart pounding, my voice trembling. What's happening? Why are my things out here? My mother didn't hesitate. Her tone was flat, rehearsed, as if she had been waiting for this moment. You finished school. Now it's time to take care of yourself. Just one sentence so simple, so cold. As if the 4 years I had worked myself to the bone, the money I had put toward the electricity bills, the groceries, or the nights I stayed up fixing light bulbs and leaky pipes to save the family expenses, none of it had ever mattered. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to cry out against the humiliation flooding me. But what slipped from my lips was nothing more than a faint whisper. Today is my graduation day. My voice cracked, fragile, like a lost child calling into the dark. But my mother did not flinch. She gave a slight shrug and replied curtly, "Then consider this your graduation gift, independence. From now on, you're on your own." I stood there frozen, as if the ground had collapsed beneath me. The day that should have marked a celebration and a new beginning had become the moment my family cast me out. Diploma clutched in my arms, my feet carrying me away under the cold stares of the people I had once called my parents and brother, dragging my suitcase down the porch steps. My hands trembled so badly it felt like I had lost all sensation. Each step weighed heavy, as though a stone pressed against my chest. I still couldn't believe this was happening. And on this day of all days, yet my mother's words echoed inside my head, cold and final, like a gavel striking in a courtroom. "You've been to college. Figure it out yourself. The family has no more responsibility." I looked over at Brian standing beside my parents. He was only 20, had dropped out of school the year before, and now spent his days holed up in his room with his computer and a crowd of online gaming friends. Yet, in my parents' eyes, he was always the one who needed to be taken care of, while I was nothing more than someone who had already fulfilled her duty. As I stood on the porch, clutching my suitcase in confusion, Brian shot me a disdainful look, his lips curling into a mocking smile. "You're not even that good," he sneered. "What a waste of tuition. That degree just means you'll sit in some office typing on a computer. It's worth nothing." I bit down hard on my lip, unable to utter a single word. This was my younger brother, the one who should have shared a childhood with me. Yet now he saw my being thrown out onto the street as a joke to laugh at. My father, John, stood silently with his hands in his pockets, his eyes shifting away every time I looked at him. He didn't speak, didn't protest, didn't comfort me, and offered no defense. His silence cut deeper than my mother's cold words or Brian's cruelty. I had once believed that at the very least he cared for me, that he would never allow me to be treated this way. But in the end, he chose silence. He chose the easier side, the side of the family that cast me out, not mine. That afternoon, I loaded all my belongings into my car and drove away in tears. I had no clear plan, only the certainty that I could never return. The house where I had grown up, the place I once believed to be my only refuge, had turned into something cold and hostile, harsher than any dormitory I had ever lived in. By nightfall, I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, a run-down place with peeling walls and a flickering neon sign. The elderly owner handed me the key without even asking why. The room was cramped with a low ceiling, a sagging bed, and the stench of mold clinging to the air. But at least I had a roof over my head on the first night my family had abandoned me. I sat on the creaking mattress, staring at the empty walls as tears streamed down my face. Waves of bitterness and humiliation washed over me. I thought about that morning when I had still been wearing my graduation gown and had dreamed of celebrating with my family that evening. I remembered the thrill of stepping across the stage, the cheers of my friends, the handshakes and congratulations from professors. I remembered the joy of holding my diploma in my hands. And now all those images felt crushed into dust by the sight of my own parents casting me out on the very day that should have been one of the most beautiful memories of my life. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. I hadn't dropped out of school like Brian. I hadn't wasted money or caused trouble. I had worked non-stop to pay my tuition, to help support the family, even cutting back on my own needs just to hand over money so my mother could cover the bills. And yet now, as I stepped into the world with my diploma in hand, they turned their backs on me. The reason we need space for Brian. My entire life as a daughter, reduced to one cold statement and a suitcase dumped on the porch. That night, I hardly slept. The sound of cars rushing along the highway, the low groan of the old air conditioner, all of it only made the weight in my chest heavier. I tossed and turned with my pillow soaked in tears. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. No family, no place to return to. The cruel truth sank, and I had lost the one anchor I thought I had. Or maybe I never really had it at all. I remember the morning after staring into the mirror of that dingy motel room, with swollen eyes from crying. Only two choices filled my mind. Either give up and sink into the role of a betrayed victim, or stand up and prove that everything they believed about me was wrong. I chose the latter. Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was bitter. But somewhere deep inside, the humiliation had sparked a flame of defiance. I told myself, they think I'll fall apart. I'll show them that day, instead of asking for time off to recover, I strapped on my backpack and went straight to the marketing firm where I had interned during my final semester. It was just a small office in downtown Austin. Nothing glamorous, but to me, it felt like a lifeline. I already knew my direct supervisor, Sarah Thompson, a sharp and straightforward woman in her 30s. The moment I stepped into the office, I tried to hide my exhaustion, but my red eyes and worn-out appearance betrayed me. Sarah studied me for a long moment, then tilted her head slightly. "Emily, what happened? You don't look okay at all." At first I wanted to deny it, but the weight of everything I had been holding in since the day before broke me. I burst into tears and told her everything from the graduation ceremony, to seeing my belongings dumped on the porch, to the moment my parents coldly told me to leave. Sarah didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She simply sat there and listened in silence. When I finally stopped, choking back so she let out a quiet sigh. You didn't deserve that. But Emily, I see something else. You're still here. You came to work instead of collapsing in some corner. That tells me you're stronger than you realize. She handed me a cup of hot coffee, her voice calm but filled with conviction. I'm going to give you an opportunity. There's a new client project, a big one with a tech startup, and I want you on it. It's going to be tough, it's going to be demanding, but I believe you can handle it. Think of this as a new beginning. I was stunned. Me, a girl just cast out by her own family, being trusted with an important project. In that moment, it felt as if fate had opened a different door for me to walk through. The days that followed, I threw myself into work completely. The office became my new home, my laptop, and files my closest companions. I worked until I lost track of time, sometimes staying so late that I didn't leave until the security guard made his rounds. I learned how to draft marketing strategies, analyze customer data, and design presentation decks. There were nights I was so exhausted I thought I would collapse. But then I would remember Brian's sneer, my mother's cold words, my father's silent betrayal. Those memories cut like knives, but they also fueled me forward. Sarah would often pass by my desk late at night, reminding me, "Don't forget to rest, Emily. Endurance matters more than speed." I forced a tired smile, but inside I felt nothing but gratitude. In Sarah, I found the presence of someone who believed in me, something my family never had. And slowly that belief became the strength that carried me through the long nights. The first month passed, and my very first project was a resounding success. The client was thrilled, and revenue soared beyond expectations. Sarah called me into the conference room, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Well done, Emily. You've proven that you're not only skilled, but also resilient. I've never seen anyone fresh out of college handle pressure like this. Keep going. Don't stop now." I walked out of that room with my heart racing, and for the first time since being thrown out, I felt a genuine sense of hope stirring inside me. That night, back in the damp motel room, I switched on the desk lamp, laid out a piece of paper, and wrote down a single sentence before taping it to the wall. "I will succeed not so they come back, but so they see I never needed them." In the dim yellow glow, I stared at the shaky but determined handwriting, and I knew my real journey had only just begun. I still remember clearly how after that first project success, everything in my life began to shift. The marketing office, which I had once seen as just a temporary place to pass the time, suddenly became my battlefield, a place where I poured every ounce of energy and passion. I took on more and more projects, from consumer product campaigns to media strategies for small brands trying to establish their name. I wasn't a genius, but I knew how to listen to clients to understand what they wanted to express and to turn that into compelling stories people couldn't ignore. There were nights I sat for hours drawing mind maps, organizing every idea, figuring out how to transform a dull product into something people would talk about online. That persistence earned me the respect of my colleagues and left clients deeply impressed. When the company announced the quarterly results, Sarah called me into her office. I felt a flicker of worry, afraid I might have made some mistake, but the smile on her face told me otherwise. "Emily," she said, "I want to officially promote you to a full-time position. No more intern, no more contractor. This will be a stable role with a salary that reflects everything you've contributed." I sat in silence for a few seconds, my heart pounding. From someone thrown out of her home with nothing, I was now being recognized as a permanent employee. Tears threatened to spill over, but I held them back and answered softly, "Thank you. I won't let you down." Oh, in the months that followed, with a steady income, I knew I had to leave that dingy motel room behind. Every time I returned there, smelling the damp mold and hearing the constant noise from the hallway, I felt like I was sinking deeper into the darkness. So, I put aside most of my salary and savings to rent a small apartment in downtown Austin. It wasn't big, just one bedroom and a living room with an open kitchen, but it was clean, bright, and had a window overlooking the park. On move-in day, I stood in the middle of the empty room, set down the single suitcase that had followed me since the day I was thrown out, and burst into tears. But these were not tears of shame, they were tears of relief. For the first time in my life, I had a home of my own without fear that anyone could cast me out. While I was arranging the new place, Lisa, my best friend from college, came to help. She had always been the one person who believed in me, even when I felt small because of my family background. She brought me a little potted plant, placed it by the window, and said, "So every morning when you wake up, you'll remember that you deserve to bloom too." Together, we cleaned, hung up a few cheap paintings I'd bought at a flea market, and set up the desk I had ordered online. When we finally looked around the apartment, Lisa smiled, patted my shoulder, and said, "You did it, Em. No one can take this from you. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not enough again." Those words etched themselves into my heart. Every time I came home late from work, opening the door to a brightly lit apartment, I felt a peace I had never known in my old house. I started cooking meals for myself, hanging photos of friends instead of family, and slowly learning to enjoy the rhythm of independent living. Each night, I set aside a little time to sit by the window, watching the city lights shimmer, and thought to myself, I've gone farther than they ever imagined. My success wasn't loud or flashy, but it was enough to rekindle my faith in myself. I didn't need my parents' recognition. I didn't need my brother's praise. All I needed was the knowledge that I had risen from being discarded to having a place I could finally call home. And that was the truest victory of all. 2 years after being thrown out in my graduation gown, my life had taken a completely different turn. Those years were anything but easy. There were moments when I thought I wouldn't survive. But every sleepless night at the office, every tense meeting with clients, every proposal I revised dozens of times had built towards something. I was no longer the quiet intern bowing my head to take assignments. I had become a key employee in the company, trusted by clients and respected by colleagues. My salary, along with freelance projects I took on after hours, allowed me to build up real savings. I opened a personal account and carefully deposited a portion of my income each month, refusing to waste money carelessly. Every dollar I saved reminded me of the day my belongings were thrown onto the porch, pushing me to make sure that one day I would have a place that was truly mine. The day I signed the contract for my first house in Round Rock, Texas, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. It was a modest 3-bedroom home with an old oak tree in the front yard and a backyard just big enough for flowers or a small vegetable garden. It wasn't luxurious or grand like the houses in magazines, but to me it was everything. From a girl cast out into the street, I had built the strength to walk into a home of my own making. The feeling was both overwhelming with joy and aching with pain, because deep down I knew there was no one in my family who would truly share that happiness with me. The day I received the keys, I drove to Round Rock under a sky so clear it felt painted, sunlight pouring down across the quiet suburban streets. My heart pounded as I pulled up in front of my new house, its windows freshly polished, its exterior painted a soft cream white. I stood there for several minutes, breathing in the scent of freshly cut grass, drifting over from the neighbor's yard, letting the moment settle deeply into me. Then I slid the key into the lock, and the crisp click echoed like a declaration that this was where I belonged. The door swung open, and I stepped into the empty living room, where the late afternoon light streamed through the wide window and stretched long across the wooden floor. I set my bag down, looked around at the open space, and tears rolled silently down my cheeks. Every drop carried pride proof of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of effort over the last 2 years. Yet along with joy came an undeniable ache. In the dreams I had as a child, if I ever bought a house, My parents would be there with cake and flowers, laughter filling the air. But reality was different. Today it was just me standing alone in an empty home, holding on to loneliness like the shadows stretching across the floor. I spent the afternoon wandering from room to room. The master bedroom was small but cozy, with a window facing the sunrise, and I pictured myself waking tomorrow to golden light spilling in. The two smaller rooms I planned to keep, one as a home office, the other left for guests. The kitchen had old wooden cabinets, not modern but clean, more than enough for me to cook whatever I wanted without fear of criticism. Out in the backyard, I lingered, my hand brushing along the wooden fence, imagining rows of lavender growing there one day, their fragrance drifting into the living room on the breeze. That night, I laid a thin mattress in the middle of the living room and opened the same suitcase that had followed me from the motel to the apartment. And now, here. I took out my graduation diploma and placed it on the wooden shelf. It no longer stood simply as a symbol of academic achievement, but as a reminder that my journey of independence had begun the day I was cast aside. Lying down, staring at the ceiling, I felt both peace and a deep sting. Happiness because I finally had a place to call my own. Pain because the people who should have been here to witness it, to celebrate it with me, were the very ones who had chosen to turn their backs. In that moment, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. This house will be the beginning of a new life. Here, I will build happiness without ever needing their approval. And so, under the calm night sky of Round Rock, I drifted into my first sleep in my new home, my heart heavy yet filled with hope. One sweltering May afternoon after finishing work, and sitting in the living room of my house in Round Rock, my phone suddenly buzzed. On the screen appeared a name I thought I would never see again. Brian. For a second, my heart froze. 2 years had passed without a single message, not even a happy birthday. Not once had they reached out. I had grown used to that cold silence, teaching myself to live as if they no longer existed in my life. Yet now that familiar ringtone rang out like a ghost from the past returning to haunt me. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the decline button. A part of me wanted to end the call immediately, not giving him even a chance to speak. But curiosity, or maybe some faint old instinct about family, made me answer. Brian's voice came through, nothing like the arrogant tone I remembered. It was low, hesitant, almost trembling. "Sis, it's me, Brian. Things at home, they're really bad. Dad lost his job, and Mom's spending has put us in heavy debt. I can't pay my tuition anymore. We're family, aren't we? You could help, right?" I sat frozen, staring blankly out the window. In an instant, my mind was flooded with the memory of that afternoon 2 years ago. Me still in my graduation gown, standing on the porch, staring at my suitcases and boxes tossed aside like trash, hearing my mother's cold voice telling me, "From now on, you're on your own," while Brian smirked and sneered, "You're not good at anything." That scene cut into me like a blade, etched so deeply that just the sound of his voice brought all the humiliation and despair rushing back. I gripped the phone tightly, taking a deep breath to steady the tremor in my voice. "Family," I repeated with such biting sarcasm that even I was surprised by the edge in my tone. Family doesn't abandon you on the most important day of your life. Family doesn't throw their daughter out of the house right after she graduates. And family doesn't laugh while she drags her suitcase off the porch like a stranger. So don't use that word with me, Brian. I don't owe any of you anything. That the line went quiet for a moment, broken only by Brian's heavy breathing. I pictured him scrambling for a way to spin this, just like he always had when our mother used to shield him. Sure enough, his voice came again, faster, more desperate. "I know you're still angry, but things are really bad now. You don't understand. Mom keeps spending recklessly. Dad's depressed and can't find work. The house, it might go into foreclosure. I thought maybe you could lend the family some money, Just enough to get through this. His words hit me like a bucket of ice water, so that was it. That was. After 2 years of silence, the call wasn't about love or regret or reconciliation. It was about money. They remembered me only when they were desperate, seeing me as nothing more than a walking wallet. A dry, bitter laugh escaped me, part ache and part relief. At least now I finally knew exactly what I was worth to them. Listen, Brian, I said slowly, each word dropping like a hammer. For 2 years, not a single message. I went through hell, stood up on my own, bought my own house, built my life from nothing. Where were you then? When I needed a roof over my head, you locked the door. When I needed one word of encouragement, you stayed silent. And now you show up at my door for money. No, Brian. The answer is no. H. I heard him swallow hard on the other end, his voice falling into something weak, almost pitiful. But we're still blood, still brother and sister. I closed my eyes, fighting down the wave of emotion. A small part of me tugged at those words, blood. But the rest of me, the part hardened by betrayal and years of silence, knew the truth. Those ties had been severed long ago. No, Brian, I whispered, my voice both steady and trembling. Family isn't blood. Family is the people who stand beside you when you fall. And clearly, I was never family to any of you. I ended the call decisively, my hands still shaking from the surge of adrenaline. In the quiet of my living room, I could hear my heartbeat pounding, a rhythm of pain mixed with relief. I knew that from this moment on, my path and theirs had split for good. There was no space left for pity, no room for blind obligation. They had chosen to cut me out of their lives 2 years ago. Now I was simply finishing what they had started. Leaning back in my chair, tears streamed down my face, but a small smile tugged at my lips. The pain lingered, but something new had begun to rise inside me. True freedom. I was no longer bound by ties that only tightened when there was something to take. I had chosen to stop, and this time I would not look back. A few days after that cold call with Brian, just as I was beginning to breathe steadily again, the real storm arrived. It was a quiet weekend morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee, the early sunlight spilling through the window and bathing the room in gold. I had planned to spend the day organizing work files and tending to the little garden out back. But then the doorbell rang long, insistent, breaking the calm. I thought perhaps it was a neighbor stopping by or a delivery I'd been expecting. But when I glanced at the door camera, my chest tightened. Standing on my porch were my parents and Brian. For a moment it felt like the past had come back to slam into me. My mind raced with the question, how did they even know where I lived? My mother, Mary, stood with her arms crossed, her eyes sweeping over everything critically. My father, John, lingered quietly behind her, avoiding my gaze, just as he always had. And Brian wore a hoodie, his face set in that familiar half-smirk. The sight of them sent a shiver down my spine. No warning, no call, just showing up at my doorstep as if this house somehow belonged to them. I opened the door, forcing my voice to stay calm. "What are you doing here?" Mary immediately stepped forward, her eyes sweeping across the living room before curling her lips into a half-smile sweet on the surface, but chilling underneath. "This house is also part of the family's success. You should share it. We'll move in, live together again, just like before. Nice and cozy. End of chapter." Her words hit me like a hammer to the skull. I stared at her in disbelief. Share family success. Have you forgotten that day? My graduation day when I was still in my cap and gown, my belongings thrown onto the porch. You were the ones who cast me out. And today, you have the nerve to stand here and say this. Mary took a deep breath, her face calm, as if she had rehearsed the answer. You're exaggerating. That day, we only wanted to give you the chance to grow up. If we hadn't pushed you out, would you have become the person you are today? You should be grateful, Emily. Her words made the blood in my veins boil. They were twisting abandonment into some kind of gift. Brian, who had been silent until now, suddenly chimed in with his mocking tone. Exactly. Look at you now. Nice house. Good job. If it weren't for us pushing you, you'd probably still be stuck renting some tiny apartment. And yet, you're being selfish, not thinking about family, a 3-bedroom house, and you live here alone. Let us move in. It'll be fun. I let out a bitter laugh. Selfish. I worked myself to the bone for 2 years, saving every penny to buy this place. When I was stranded on the street, who reached out to help me? When I was eating instant noodles in a moldy motel, who stood by me? Now that I finally have a home, you show up demanding to share. No, Brian. This is my house. No one has the right to step inside but me. 1. The air grew thick, tense enough that I could hear the pounding of my own heart. Mary's face darkened, her voice cutting like ice. So, you would deny your own blood? Don't forget, without us, you wouldn't even have today. I couldn't hold back any longer. No, it's because of you that I had to walk through hell to get here. My success is not thanks to you. It's because I stood up after being betrayed. Don't ever come here demanding anything from me again. This I pointed straight at the door, my voice sharp and final. Out. This is my house. You have no right to be here, no right to claim a single brick of it. Brian let out a mocking laugh, shaking his head. You'll regret this, turning your back on family. But I didn't let him finish. I stepped forward, flung the door wide open, and kept my arm extended toward the street. Out now. Now. Mary glared at me, fury flashing in her eyes, but she tugged Brian backward. John stayed silent, sighing, his gaze fixed anywhere but on me. For a few moments, we stood on opposite sides of the threshold, two opposing lines with no way back. Finally, they turned and walked away, their figures shrinking into the quiet street. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, my whole body trembling. Relief washed over me, but so did a creeping dread. They had come to my doorstep, boldly declaring their supposed claim. I knew this wasn't over. They wouldn't give up. And somewhere deep inside, I already sensed the real battle was only beginning. After that heated confrontation on my porch, I thought maybe they would finally accept the truth, that I was no longer the family's lifeline. But only a few days later, the fragile calm shattered. My phone lit up with messages from numbers I hadn't seen in years, an aunt, an uncle, even cousins who had long kept their distance. Each message carried the same tone. I heard your parents helped you buy that house. Is that true? Why are you refusing to share when it was always family property? Don't shame the family like this, Emily. Reading those words, my hands shook with rage. It was obvious my parents and Brian had already begun spreading lies, twisting the story until I was painted as the ungrateful daughter who stole credit for something that wasn't hers. Anger quickly gave way to fear. I knew my mother, Mary, all too well. She wouldn't stop at spreading rumors. She was determined and cunning. If she truly believed this house was family property, she wouldn't hesitate to go further, even to the point of forging documents or trying to drag me into court to claim her share. The thought of it sent a chill down my spine. I had lost once before. I couldn't afford to lose again. In my confusion, I turned to Lisa. She had been by my side from the very beginning, the one who saw my tears when I first stepped into that tiny apartment in Austin. Lisa listened carefully, her brows furrowed, then placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Em, you can't fight them alone. But don't worry, I know someone who can help. Do you remember David? My old classmate. He's a lawyer now. I'll arrange for you to meet him. One afternoon later, I found myself sitting in a familiar cafe with Lisa and David, a tall young man with sharp eyes, but a calm voice. I told him everything from being thrown out of my parents' house, to buying my home in Round Rock, to the confrontation on my doorstep. David listened intently, occasionally tapping notes into his laptop, When I finished, he straightened, his gaze locking onto mine. Emily, I'll be direct. They absolutely could fabricate a story that they contributed money, then attempt to forge documents to back it up. If they're reckless enough, they might even file a lawsuit to drag you into court. Winning isn't guaranteed for them, but it would cost you time, energy, and peace of mind. My heart tightened as the words sank in. I had thought I was safe in this home, but now it seemed everything was still fragile. David went on. The important thing is to prepare now. Keep every record of income, pay stubs, your house purchase, contract, bank transfers, tax receipts, everything. The more evidence, the better. We need to build a solid file so that if they make a move, you won't be caught off guard. I nodded, feeling as if I had just been handed orders for battle. Lisa clasped my hand firmly, her voice unwavering. Em, you built all of this with your own strength. Don't let them strip that pride away from you. David will help and I'll be right here too. Do that night. I went home and pulled out every old file I had saved. Pay stubs from the marketing firm, freelance contracts, bank statements showing every deposit into my savings account, and most importantly, the purchase contract for the house and the payment records. I sorted them carefully into a binder as if I were constructing a wall of protection around myself. Every document was proof. Every page, a piece of evidence that I had risen on my own. As I organized the papers, memories from 2 years earlier came flooding back me, collapsed on the bed of a moldy motel room. Convinced I had no future, I gripped the pages tightly and told myself, no one will ever take this from me again. If they drag me into court, I will stand tall and face it. In the days that followed, David combed through every detail with me. He drafted a legal file guiding me on how to secure notarized copies. He warned, Emily, be ready for them to attack in other ways, more rumors, attempts to smear your reputation. Don't get dragged into their noise. All we need is the truth. I nodded, my chest trembling, but firm. I knew the battle with my family was far from over. In fact, it was escalating into a new stage. Not insults hurled on the porch, but a war fought with paperwork and the law. But this time, I wasn't alone. I had Lisa. I had David. And above all, I had myself, a Emily no longer cast out onto the street, but a Emily with a home, with conviction, and ready to defend it at all costs. I thought I had braced myself for the worst. But when the official summons from the courthouse arrived, my heart still pounded wildly. My family, the very people who had thrown me out on graduation day, were now suing me, claiming the house in Round Rock as family property. They weren't just trying to steal the first home I had scraped together penny by penny. They were trying to paint me as ungrateful, as a thief. David set the lawsuit papers down on the table, his tone calm but resolute. We'll face this head on. Consider this the moment to end it for good. On the appointed day, I walked into the law office with my hands gripping tightly around the binder of evidence David had helped me prepare. The office was spacious, its walls lined with framed awards and licenses, yet the air felt unbearably heavy. Across from me sat my parents and Brian. My mother, Mary, wore a dark dress, her face carefully made up, though her ringed eyes suggested she had been crying. My father, John, sat hunched over, his hands clasped together, avoiding my gaze. Brian leaned back in his chair with a smirk on his lips, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. The hearing began. Their attorney spoke first, declaring that the house in Round Rock was purchased through the combined contributions of the Johnson family and that I had made a verbal agreement to allow my parents' joint ownership. My jaw tightened, ready to refute him, but David lightly placed a hand on the table, signaling me to wait. The attorney pressed on, accusing me of turning my back, abandoning my parents in their time of need, disregarding the bond of blood. Right on cue, Mary lowered her head, sobbing loudly, her voice breaking. This girl, We sacrificed everything to raise her, to send her to school, and now that we're struggling, she selfishly keeps it all to herself. She's ungrateful she abandoned her own parents. Her words struck me like a blade to the throat. I had once helped pay the bills, cut back on my own needs so she could afford medicine, spent nights fixing broken pipes and changing bulbs so we wouldn't have to hire anyone. And this was what she said about me. For the first time, I looked Mary straight in the eye without the slightest trace of fear. You cry in front of everyone, but will you tell the truth? On my graduation day, you threw my belongings onto the porch and told me, "From now you're on your own." I begged for a word of congratulations, for an embrace, but all I got was rejection. You say now that you raised me, but you conveniently forget that I helped raise this family with the money I earned. Brian cut in sharply, his tone hard and accusing. You're twisting the truth. You promised that when you bought a house, it would be for the family too. You said our parents would always have a place. I turned toward him, locking eyes. Can you swear under oath that I ever said that, or are you inventing it now to serve yourself? I never made that promise. This house is the one thing I built on my own, and no one has the right to interfere. David opened the binder, his voice firm and resonant in the stillness of the room. We present the evidence. This is the mortgage agreement in the name of Emily Johnson. These are her pay stubs from the marketing firm cross-cheat against her bank statements. Here are the tax receipts proving her legitimate income. Every document aligns with the payments made on the house. Not a single dollar came from Mary or John Johnson, and certainly not from Brian. In fact, their financial records show that at the time this house was purchased, they were in credit card debt. I watched as my mother's face shifted. Mary lifted her head, eyes burning with anger, her lips trembling as if searching for a rebuttal, but no words came. Brian darted a glance at my father, but John remained silent, his face drawn and ashen. David leaned back, his tone steady and cold. If you continue to insist that this house is shared property, we reserve the right to request a fraud investigation for attempted misrepresentation and unlawful claim of assets. If that happens, you won't just lose this case. You could be facing criminal charges. Are you prepared to go that far? The room fell into heavy silence. I could even hear the faint tap of a pen against the opposing lawyer's desk, as though they too realized the case had hit a dead end. Mary's stubbornness was still visible, but her shoulders trembled. Brian tapped his foot nervously, his eyes darting, all traces of confidence gone. My father exhaled deeply, lowering his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Sitting there, I felt a strange surge of strength. 2 years ago, I had dragged my suitcase out of that house with tears clouding my vision. Today, I sat upright, laying my evidence on the table, proving to everyone how I had climbed from the very bottom. I was no longer the weak daughter begging for affection. I was the rightful owner of my life. The tension in the room had been sharp as a wire, but this time, I wasn't the one cornered. I had stood my ground, and they were the ones caught with no way out. After the confrontation at the law office, I thought everything was finally over. My parents and Brian left in silence, not saying another word, and I exhaled with relief, believing that the evidence I had presented was enough to put their schemes to rest. But David wasn't so certain. When we sat down afterward, his brow furrowed, his tone low and thoughtful. Emily, I don't think they'll give up that easily. Something isn't right here. I want to take a deeper look into your family's finances. His words sent a pang through my chest. I had never once thought of digging into my parents' past, but the sharpness in David's eyes and his years of experience made me nod in agreement. A few days later, David called me to his office. When I walked in, he was already seated with a thick folder in front of him. He looked at me with a grave expression. Emily, what I found may shock you, but you need to know the truth if you're going to protect yourself. My hands tightened around the strap of my bag, and I gave a small nod. David opened the folder and flipped through the pages. Your parents, Mary and John Johnson, have unpaid taxes stretching back years. They've been flagged before, suspected of falsifying income reports. On top of that, their credit cards are maxed out and much of their property has been mortgaged. They're drowning in debt. And Emily, he paused, fixing his gaze on mine. They're looking at your house as their only way out. I sat frozen. Images flashed through my mind. My father lowering his head in silence at the law office. My mother crying while playing the victim. Brian mocking me as selfish. All the pieces fell into place, forming one undeniable picture. They hadn't come to me for family or for reconciliation. They had come because of debt. They wanted to turn the one thing I had built, the only fruit of my struggle, into a lifeline to bail them out of the mess they had created. A few days later, David asked me to come to his office. When I walked in, he was already seated with a thick folder in front of him. His eyes were grave as he looked at me. Emily, what I found may shock you, but you need to know this truth in order to protect yourself. My grip tightened on the strap of my bag, and I gave a small nod. David opened the file, turning page after page. Your parents, Mary and John Johnson, have years of unpaid taxes. They've been warned before, even flagged for suspected income fraud. On top of that, their credit cards are overdue and many of their assets are already under lien. They cannot pay their debts. And Emily, he paused, staring straight into my eyes. They're clinging to your house as their only way out. I sat frozen. In my mind, I saw my father lowering his head in silence at the law office. My mother weeping while playing the victim. Brian mocking me as selfish. The pieces fit together into one clear picture. They hadn't come for family. They hadn't come to reconcile. They came because of debt. They wanted to turn the only thing I had built into the life raft that would save them from the mess they themselves had created. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. David went on. I also uncovered something else. 2 years ago, right after they threw you out of the old house, records show they refinanced it to borrow more money. A large portion of that money disappeared into Mary's reckless spending and credit card bills. And Brian, he was given a bigger room, newly furnished. In other words, that so-called push for independence they claimed was never about helping you grow. It was simply to free up space and make things easier for Brian. Hearing that, my chest tightened as though someone had gripped it in iron hands. So the day I thought was the greatest tragedy of my life was nothing more than selfish calculation. I hadn't been cast out for an opportunity to grow as Mary preached, but because I was no longer useful to them. They chose Brian. They chose comfort and space for their golden son, and they chose to discard me, the daughter who had worked herself to the bone to keep the family afloat. A storm of emotions surged through me. I felt pain, fury, but strangely, I also felt release because now everything was clear. There was no space left for illusions, no reason to torture myself with the question of what I had done wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. They were the ones who chose to put self-interest and favoritism above family. I whispered softly, almost to myself. So it all came down to giving Brian a bigger room. David studied me, his eyes filled with empathy. I know this is hard to accept, but Emily, take it as the clearest proof that you don't owe them anything. They destroyed this relationship on their own. I nodded, tears streaming down my face, but they no longer carried the same weight as before. For the first time in years, I felt clarity in my heart. I saw the truth. My parents were never my protectors. They were people willing to sacrifice me for their comfort and selfishness. That night, I sat alone in the living room, looking around my house in Round Rock. Every wall, every doorway, every corner of the backyard stood as a witness to the path I had taken. I once thought this place was simply a house, but now I understood it was a fortress, shielding me from manipulation and exploitation. I whispered into the dark. I've seen the truth, and this time I won't be afraid. The trial moved faster than I expected. With all the evidence David had assembled, pay stubs, bank statements, mortgage contracts, tax receipts, the judge needed less than a morning to conclude. My family's lawsuit was entirely without merit. As the judge read the ruling, I glanced across the courtroom. Mary sat stiff-backed, her face flushed red with rage, though she still tried to feign composure. She interrupted repeatedly, insisting, "This is family property," and "Our daughter promised to share," but every word was struck down immediately, for lack of proof. John was different. He sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands clenched tightly together. Every so often, I caught him glancing up, his gaze meeting mine for a fleeting second before darting away, as though he couldn't bear to face the truth. The sight left me torn between sorrow and cold detachment. Perhaps he had known all along that this lawsuit was nothing but a farce. Yet, he still chose to stand beside Mary. Brian, the one who was usually the loudest, sank back in his chair that day, arms crossed, eyes shifting nervously around the room. When the judge addressed him, his answers were curt-clipped, never once daring to meet anyone's eyes head-on. At last, the verdict was delivered. The lawsuit was dismissed on the grounds of willfully providing false information. My family was formally reprimanded for their deceit and warned of harsher penalties should they attempt such actions again. But that wasn't the end of it. As we stepped down from the bench, their lawyer bowed his head in apology to the court for presenting incomplete information while David gave me a firm, steady look. "There's one more piece to this, Emily. The IRS is going to step in." And he was right. Just days later, news reached me through David. The IRS had officially opened an investigation into Mary and John Johnson. The very issues David had uncovered, years of unpaid taxes, falsified income reports, suspicious spending, were now concrete evidence prompting federal action. When I heard, I sat still in my chair, fingers tightening around my coffee cup. A part of me ached with sadness, but another part rose with a strange peace. At last, the truth had forced them to face consequences. In the hearings that followed, I crossed paths with Mary several times in the courthouse hallway. She still wore her defiance like armor, muttering under her breath that I was a traitor to my blood, that without her and John, there would be no Emily today. I gave no response. I simply stood tall, walked past, and let her words scatter like dust in the air. I had spent too many years trying to prove myself to them, trying to earn their recognition. Now I understood nothing I ever did could change the way they chose to see me. John was quieter than ever. He avoided my gaze, sometimes even standing apart from Mary and Brian. There was a fleeting moment when I thought I saw regret in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as a breeze. I no longer sought answers from him. As for Brian, the same brother who once reveled in watching me dragged out of the house, he now fumed when the lawsuit collapsed. All he could do was throw me a venomous glare before storming off, powerless. The arrogance he had once worn like armor was gone, replaced by the confusion of someone who no longer had anything left to cling to. On the final day, I stepped out of the courthouse into the blazing afternoon sun. The heavy wooden doors closed behind me, and I drew in a deep breath. The sound of my heels echoed steadily across the steps, blending into the city's noise. My shoulders felt lighter, as if I had finally cast off a burden I had carried for years. 2 years ago, I had left my parents' house with nothing but a suitcase and tears, drowning in humiliation. Today, I walked out of court with my head held high, carrying with me the certainty that I had stood tall and defended what was mine. I knew from this moment on, my life and theirs would forever diverge. The IRS investigation would continue, and sooner or later they would have to pay for the financial lies they had sown. As for me, I had my own home, true friends by my side, and a freedom I had never dared to dream of before. Standing on the courthouse steps, I sighed. But this time, it wasn't the sigh of sorrow. It was the sigh of release. 1 week after the case was closed, I chose to do something I never would have imagined 2 years earlier. I opened my home in Round Rock for a small gathering. Not a lavish party, no endless flowers or long tables lined with champagne. Just a warm evening with a few dishes I cooked myself, a buttery pie fresh from the oven, and the people I truly wanted by my side: Sarah, Lisa, David, and a handful of close colleagues. That morning I woke early to shop for ingredients. Driving home, my heart raced with a mix of nerves and excitement. I remembered the scene 2 years ago, graduation day, walking home with fragile hope, only to collapse when I found my belongings dumped on the porch. That image had once been a deep scar, convincing me I didn't deserve a place to call home. Yet now, with these same hands, I was laying out plates, stringing lights across the backyard, preparing to welcome the people who, though not bound to me by blood, had become the strongest foundation in my life. That afternoon, Lisa arrived early, carrying a bouquet of purple lavender. She placed it on the dining table with a smile. "I remember you once said you wanted to plant lavender in the backyard. For now, here's a vase to start with." I pulled her into an embrace, my voice breaking. "Lisa, you're the family I always wished I had." Sarah brought a bottle of red wine, setting it down before patting my shoulder. "Tonight, leave work behind. This girl deserves to celebrate." David came last, holding a gift wrapped in brown paper. When I opened it, I found an empty wooden picture frame. He smiled. "So, you can choose the photo yourself. A moment that truly belongs to Emily." As the sun set, we gathered around the table in the backyard. The warm glow of the lights fell across everyone's faces. Laughter echoed, and the aroma of food mingled with the cool evening breeze. Looking around, I felt an unfamiliar warmth. No accusations, no disdainful stares, no sense of abandonment, only sharing, trust, and simple joy. One colleague raised a glass, teasing Emily. Who would have thought the girl who used to stay late at the office every night would throw such a fun party? Everyone laughed, and I only smiled, my throat tightening with emotion. I knew how far I had come to reach this moment. At the end of the meal, while conversations still buzzed around me, I stood up and lifted my glass. My voice trembled slightly, but remained firm. 2 years ago, I thought I had lost everything. On my graduation day, I came home and realized my family was no longer there. But step by step, I learned how to rise, to work, to build a new life. And tonight, looking around this table, I realized something. Family isn't about blood, isn't about. Family is about the ones who choose to stand beside you, who hold your hand when you're weak, and who smile with you when you succeed. I lost a family, but I also found a real one. For a few seconds, silence lingered. Then applause filled the air, mingling with laughter and the crisp clink of glasses. Lisa's eyes brimmed with tears. Sarah nodded firmly, and David smiled with quiet pride. In that moment, my heart softened. The old wounds remained, but they no longer defined me. I had survived rejection, legal battles, and loneliness. Now here I stood in my own home with the people I chose to call family. That day, later that night, after everyone had gone, I tidied up the table and switched off the strings of twinkling lights one by one. I stepped into the backyard, sank into a wooden chair, and looked up at the star-strewn sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender from the table. I smiled faintly, whispering the words I had spoken earlier. Family is the ones who choose to stay. And I knew in that moment I was finally free. If you have ever been hurt by your own blood, remember this: that pain does not define your worth. Their rejection does not mean you are undeserving of love or respect. Sometimes being cast aside becomes the very beginning of rewriting your life story. True family isn't built on blood alone. Family is the people who choose to stand beside you, who share your sorrow, and who celebrate your joy. They might be a friend, a colleague, or even strangers willing to reach out and lift you up. So, if today you feel lost, believe this: You can still build a new home, one filled with safety, love, and mutual respect. You do not need the approval of those who once belittled you to be whole. You have always been enough, and you deserve a family of your choosing. Thank you for listening to my